Right. So today, Dr. Shashikant Ji, who's a specialist in sports injuries, is going to give a talk on ligament injuries, especially focusing on anterior cruciate ligament injury around the knee. And he does foot and ankle surgery as well, along with knee surgery. So Dr. Shashikant has been trained in, as a fellowship, trained in sports injuries in the UK, and he's been practicing for the last 8 years as a part of our team, along with Dr. Ved Prakash and myself. And he's done his fellowship along with FRCS Orth, both from the UK, and he practiced there for 10 years, and he moved back about 8 years ago. We were together for about 6.5 years in K, and then after that we moved to Somajiguda Yashoda for the last 2 years. He specializes in arthroscopic work of knee. So today he's going to give you an outline on various ligament injuries around the knee, focusing mainly on ACL injuries, the diagnosis, treatment, and the role of physiotherapy. So all over to you, Dr. Shashikant. Please carry on.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Praveen, for the introduction.
Thank you.
And as you said, I mean, this is a series of webinars which we're going to do over a period of time, concentrating on various topics of orthopedics, which will be beneficial for most of the people. The topics which we have chosen are also something which are very, very relevant and which are very common. So the first topic of today's discussion, as Praveen rightly mentioned, is to discuss a common topic. So we thought we will start with anterior cruciate ligament injuries, and so we'll start with the anterior cruciate ligament injuries and then carry on forward every week. So this is the topic for the day, for my topic. And as Praveen rightly mentioned, apart from the surgical aspects, we also have Dr. Rajesh with us, HOD of physiotherapy, who is going to cover the important aspect of physiotherapy post ACL surgery. The reason we have chosen ACL to start with is because ACL is one of the most commonly injured ligament, and the treatment is pretty much streamlined as far as ACL is concerned. Only when it is associated with other multi-ligament injuries, obviously the treatment is somewhat a bit dicey. But pure ACL injuries, we have specific protocols and guidelines which we follow to get the best outcome for the patient. So let us crack on with ACL for tonight, and then we'll be followed by a question and answer session and a discussion. People will be joining in between as well, so we will probably cover whatever has been missed in the talk during the process of the discussion. So before going into any further details about ACL, or the anterior cruciate ligament, which we commonly call, we need to probably have a bit of understanding about the ligamentous anatomy of the knee. So these are just pictorial depictions of the knee, looking at it from an oblique view and from the AP view, just showing us the different ligaments. And this is the ACL, which we call the anterior cruciate ligament, which is the cruciate ligament. And at the back of the knee, we have the posterior cruciate ligament. So these are the two main ligaments, and we'll just go through them in detail. So we have in the knee, when as far as the ligaments are concerned, two main ligaments, the cruciates and the collaterals. The cruciates are so called because they crisscross in the inside of the knee in a crisscross fashion, and they're very crucial for the stability of the knee. Hence, they get the name as cruciate ligament. And the one which is present in the anterior aspect of the knee or in the front of the knee is called the anterior cruciate ligament, or the ACL, about which we are going to deal in detail. The main function of the anterior cruciate ligament is basically to resist anterior translation. And as you know, the basic definition of a ligament is a structure which holds two bones of the joint together. So the anterior cruciate, along with the other ligaments in the knee, holds the tibia and the femur together. And the main function of the ACL is to resist any anterior translation. So that is what people usually have the complaint of instability, because that resistance to anterior translation is gone. Similarly, we have the posterior cruciate ligament, which is in the back of the knee, which resists posterior translation. So these two cruciate ligaments together give significant stability to the knee joint. And the most common symptom which people come across when you have any either ACL or a PCL ligament is instability, because they resist translation. Apart from the cruciate ligaments, we also have two ligaments on the side of the knee, which are called the collateral ligaments. And the one which is present on the medial side, which is attached to the femur and the tibia, is called the medial collateral ligament. And the one which is attached on the lateral side is the lateral collateral ligament. And obviously, in a situation where you have a multi-ligamentous injury, where we have more than one ligament which is injured, ACL is most commonly injured ligament along with the other ligaments. And apart from the ligamentous structures inside the knee, it is probably very apt for us to know that apart from the ligamentous structures around the knee, you also have what are called as meniscus inside the knee. So there is one medial meniscus, as we see here, between the tibia and the femur. And you have the lateral meniscus, which is on the lateral side. And most often than not, whenever there is an ACL injury or a multi-ligamentous injury, usually the meniscus are also injured. So it is quite important to know that these structures do exist inside the knee. So before we go into further details about the anterior cruciate ligament, I think it is very apt for us to know what exactly does the ACL do? Why is it very important to study or probably know about it? One, as I said, it is probably one of the most commonly injured ligaments. So that is the reason we need to know about it. And as we said, it prevents anterior translation of tibia. So there are other structures also which prevent the anterior translation, but 85% of the restraint is provided by the ACL. The rest of the menisci and other structures also prevent anterior translation, but most of the restraint is by the ACL. And apart from the anterior translation, it also has a secondary restraint to rotation and varus valgus angulation at full extension. So any rotation of the tibia on the femur is also restrained by the ACL. So that is the reason it prevents any rotation of the tibia on the femur. So when we come to the mechanism of injury, we'll go through that. And also the ACL, as we said, is a very strong ligament. And the average tensile length is 2,160 Newton. So it really needs a good force to tear an ACL. So ACL just doesn't tear on its own with a very small injury. It needs a definite big force to probably go through that. And as we said, the most common mechanism of injury, people come with an ACL injury due to different mechanism of injuries, but the most common injury is basically patient has a fixed foot on the ground and the knee rotates. So it's the rotation injury that usually causes the ACL injury. And the other ways the ACL can get injured are dashboard injuries, where you have a translation of the tibia. And in those situations, sometimes you have the PCL injury also associated with that. And sometimes, as we said, hyperextension injuries also can tear the ACL. And more often than not, as Noyes et al. Have suggested, 78% are basically non-contact injuries. So by non-contact injuries, we mean that there is no contact with the other sportsman while this injury happens. So it's somebody while playing any sport like a basketball or something, suddenly landing on a foot and rotating, or probably playing football or soccer and then going on to a fixed foot. These are the most common type of injuries, and the rest of them are non-contact contact injuries. So ACL, as we said, the most common injury. So when a patient comes in with an ACL injury, suspected ACL injury, we usually examine him and then probably go in for investigations, which will guide us towards management. So as far as diagnosing an ACL injury is concerned, obviously we do have radiological investigations, but the most common way or probably rule of diagnosing an ACL injury will be with a history. And as we said, non-contact injury is the most common way of ACL injury. So the patient usually gives a history of probably a sudden change in direction or landing from a jump. Typically happens when people play basketball. Change in direction we come across when people play soccer. And suddenly they hear a popping noise, which is heard by some of the teammates, or probably the patient hears a popping noise. And within few hours, within the next few minutes, there's a big hemarthrosis and the patient is not able to walk, and there's a lot of pain as well. So they are unable to return to play. So this is a typical history when you have a non-contact injury and a patient gives history of suggestive of ACL injury. So when a patient gives this history, this is very highly suspicious of an ACL injury. And the other situation, as we mentioned, is high energy contact injuries. So road traffic accidents, or probably a big tackle while playing sports like soccer or rugby, where a lot of people are kabaddi, where a lot of people are onto the knee, where there's a high contact and high energy. And these situations also can cause an ACL injury. And the most important thing, as I mentioned before, is ACL injury is more often than not associated with other ligament injuries or a meniscal injury. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So once with the history, we have got some suspicion that the patient has an ACL injury, then we'll go in and examine a patient. So clinically, we examine the patient and try and assess how stable his knee is. Practically, when a patient comes in immediately after the injury, because there's a lot of swelling, a lot of pain, it is very difficult to examine, and the patient has a lot of apprehension. Patient has a lot of pain, so he won't let us examine very easily. So it's very difficult to examine a knee in an acute setting. But obviously, the patient comes in 3 weeks later, 6 weeks later, or 6 months later, then it's quite easy to examine for instability. And the most important dictum whenever we examine a patient knee, or probably for that matter, any other joint for instability, is to examine the normal knee, so that we have a feel of what the ligaments are like and what is an endpoint like, what is a definite endpoint, so that we have an idea of what the normal knee should probably look like. And then we go in and examine the affected side. And as I said, basically relaxation of the patient is quite important, especially when we are looking for ligamentous instability. So reassuring the patient, trying to calm him down, trying to explain to him what we are doing is quite important. And as I said, it's very difficult in acute injuries. And more often than not, we usually ask the patient to go home, let the swelling settle down, the pain settle down, get the movements back, and then come back for a re-examination. So in these situations, re-examination is also quite important. And obviously, the degree of instability is something which we look for. So when we have different tests to check for the ACL injury, there are different mechanisms by which we check. We'll go through that. And also look for the quality of instability, what we call as an endpoint. So there are different types. There's a hard endpoint, there's a soft endpoint. So those are also important. So we'll, if we go through the different tests which we use for ACL diagnosis, the one commonly used test is an anterior drawer test, examined in the way that is shown in the picture, where the patient's knee is flexed to 90 degrees and an anterior translatory force is applied onto the tibia, and looking for the translation of the tibia on the femur, and looking for the degree of translation and the endpoint. And it's, as I said, it's very difficult in an acute setting to do an anterior drawer test, and also the accuracy of the anterior drawers is only 50%. So that is something to keep in mind. The other test which we commonly use is called the Lachman's test, which is probably more relevant and more accurate. And even this is probably difficult in an acute setting, where we flex the knee to about 15 to 20 degrees, and similarly stabilize the femur with one hand, and then apply an anterior translation on the tibia. So this is probably more specific for a diagnosis of an ACL injury. And the other test is a pivot shift, which is probably more diagnostic, but it is very difficult to do this test in a OP setting. And we use this predominantly when we take the patient to theater for an examination under anesthesia. And we look for the pivot shift or the pivot glide. And as I said before as well, ACL on its own is probably a easy treatment option, but more often than not, it is associated with meniscal tears or associated chondral injuries or other ligamentous injuries. So these are the things which we should not be missing. So even when we examine the patient, we should be very vigilant to look out for other injuries apart from the ACL as well. And these things can be made out on an MRI scan, which we are going to talk about. Any knee injury which comes into the outpatient setting, the first basic investigations which we usually request are basically X-rays. Though in a pure ACL injury, an X-ray probably may not be of very much relevant, but people talk about what is called as a second sign, which is basically an avulsion injury over the lateral capsular avulsion. People talk about an anterolateral ligament, which is also probably the cause for this Segan's fracture. So these are all indirect evidences to say that the patient has an ACL injury. And apart from that, if there is an associated fracture as well, we can probably identify that on an X-ray. But the most important investigation in any ligamentous injury, and especially for an ACL injury, is an MRI scan, which is done. The basic advantage with an MRI scan is it identifies the pathology and also gives us information about different other associated injuries. As we said, an osteochondral lesion or an osteochondral injury or a meniscal injury or other ligamentous injuries, because these are very important to know in our management protocol. So pure ACL injury and associated injuries are also equally important. And for this, the MRI is quite useful. So once we have diagnosed that the patient has an ACL injury from history, from clinical examination, and the basic investigations which we talked about, then basically we usually formulate a management plan. And the management plan, as I said, depends on a lot of other symptoms, a lot of other factors. By and large, there are publications, there are various textbooks which usually tell us pure ACL injury, if we have 100 patients of ACL injury, 1/3 of the patients are usually able to manage normal life without any symptoms, even though they have an ACL injury. This is quite important because of late people tend to surgically try and manage every ACL injury, which is not very true. So out of 100 ACL injuries which we get, 33% or 1/3 usually have no symptoms and lead normal life. And 33% of the patients have occasional stability only on strenuous activity, and they can't do strenuous activity. And the rest 30% have constant instability and pain. So what this slide is telling us is basically if you have a cohort of 100 ACL patients, it's only the 33 to 35% which usually need surgery straight away. Some of them can be managed with physiotherapy and non-operative methods. And if they don't respond, then only we have to go and do surgery. And the rest of 33% of the patients who have symptoms usually will need surgery. So 33% of the patients can be managed non-operatively. This is the message this slide is telling us. So an ACL injury on an MRI or for a patient doesn't doom him to have a surgery. So this is what I wanted to convey with this. And once we have made a decision to do surgery, I mean, there are different factors which are taken into consideration when we make the decision to operate. I mean, as I said, only 33 to 35% only will need surgery, and the rest 33% after they have tried physiotherapy, if not responding, they may have to go for surgery. So the factors which we consider in putting down a patient for surgery are the degree of ACL injury. An ACL injury can be different types. It can be a complete tear, it can be a partial tear, or it can be a single bundle tear. So depending upon that, also we can formulate management plan. So if it's a partial tear or a single bundle tear, if the patient doesn't have symptoms, then we can go ahead for non-operative treatment. But if it's complete tear with instability, then we have to go for a surgery. And the other thing, as we discussed about, is associated other ligamentous injuries, chondral lesions or meniscal conditions. This probably is an important factor which will determine whether the patient needs surgery or not. So usually associated ligamentous injuries and meniscal injuries are an indication for surgery. And it also depends on the age, activity, and occupation. As I said, not every ACL will need surgery. So young, athletic, professional sports people who are keen on physical activity are definitely candidates for ACL surgery. And most other important thing is patient compliance and with post-op rehab. That is something which we normally discuss with every patient who undergoes ACL surgery, and explain to them the post-operative rehab and things and the importance of the post-operative rehab, which probably has to be emphasized on every patient who goes in for surgery. Only if the patient is agreeing to go through the principles of post-operative rehab, I think that's the time we need to take them in for surgery. So when you come to the ACL surgery per se, there are two concepts. I mean, obviously, when the ACL tears, you can either repair it or you can go for reconstruction. I mean, though I have written there no repair, there are cases which people are trying to repair, especially when there is an avulsion from either the femur or the tibia. We can as well repair these ACLs. I mean, sometimes we have an avulsion injury, especially on the tibial side, we usually repair it. So no repair, I meant only for mid-substance ACL tears, there is no repair, only reconstruction. But if the ACL avulses from either the tibia or the femur, we can repair it. Tibia we routinely repair, but femur off late also people are repairing the femoral avulsions also. So, but if it's a mid-substance ACL tear, we can't suture the ligament. So the only method of reconstruction is followed. And when we talk about reconstruction, we talk about grafts. Basically, they are the replacements for the torn ligament. And the two types of common grafts which we use are autografts and allografts. Autografts in general are the grafts taken from the patient's own body, and allografts are something which are taken from the cadavers or cadavers. So when we talk about ACL surgery, this is a basic setup of arthroscopy which we normally have. So these are the different armamentarium we need to have to perform any arthroscopic surgery, especially ACL surgery. So there is a monitor which you can see. There is a light source which we normally use. There's a shaver. There is a fluid irrigation system. There's a shaver blade. So all these things are pretty much needed to undertake a ACL surgery. And a sterile setup is all we need. And we drape the patient, and then these are the different ways we set up for an ACL. And the positioning is also quite important when we do the ACL surgery. So as you can see in these two pictures, there should be facility to hyperflex the knee when we do the ACL surgery. So that is what, these are things which we usually as surgeons check for on the table when we go in for surgery. And when we talk about the graft options, as I said, there are autografts and allografts. And autografts are the most common things which we use. And the most commonly used autograft is the hamstring graft. I use nearly 90-95% of my practice is hamstring grafts only. Some occasional cases I have used quadriceps tendon graft as well. And BTB, which is a patellar tendon graft, which has got bone on both sides. Previously, BTB used to be the gold standard ACL for ACL reconstruction, where most of the surgeons used to use BTB. But with the issues associated with graft morbidity and anterior knee pain, that has slowly come out of vogue, and hamstrings are the mainstay of ACL graft as of today. But yeah, BTB and quadriceps tendon and peroneus longus, some people are using. So the different grafts people tend to use. So just going back to the hamstrings, I mean, these are just some pictures to show how the graft is harvested. Hamstrings are a group of muscles on the back of our thighs, and they come and insert into the medial aspect of the tibia, the semitendinosus and the gracilis. Those are the two tendons which usually come and insert into the tibia. So when we do the hamstrings, we usually take those two tendons. So you usually give a small incision over the medial aspect of the tibia, isolate the graft, and then harvest the graft, and we usually prepare that. So this is the commonly used graft for ACL. So people use other grafts as well in different situations, but this is the one. And once the graft is harvested, the next step during the ACL reconstruction is to prepare the femur and the tibial tunnel, because we need to make two holes into the femur and tibia to fix this graft. And when we talk about failure of ACL, the single most common cause for the failure of any ACL is incorrect tunnel placement. So as surgeons, we take adequate precautions, double check, triple check, and cross check everything before we start drilling the tunnels into the femur and the tibia. And there are different ways of doing it. We are not going to go into too much of technical details about that, but it is very important to note that if we probably do the tunnel in the wrong place, or probably that is the first cause for failure of our ACL. And when we talk about the tunnels of ACL, both the femoral tunnel and the tibial tunnel, the diameter of the tunnel is completely dependent on the graft which we get. So if you get a graft of more than 7.5 to 8, that's a good graft. So the tunnel diameter is determined by the graft diameter, and the tunnel length is also usually determined by the graft length. And the position of the tunnel is the most paramount. So there are different ways of trying to make sure that we probably make the tunnel in the right position. So when we talk about the tunnels, we talk about the tibia and the femoral tunnel. So the tibia tunnel is usually made with the help of a tibial jig. This is what is a tibial jig. Different companies have come out with different types of jigs. Usually we keep an angle of about 45 to 50 degrees, and which is about 4 centimeters from the joint line. And once the jig is placed in the correct position, we usually look for in the arthroscope and we find out an intercondylar area where we need to put the tibial footprint, and we look at the tibial footprint. And the first thing we usually do is we usually put in a guide pin. So this is the guide pin you can see. And once the guide pin comes out in the position, we check for the right position. This is quite important because, as we said, wrong positioning of the tunnel is the predominant cause for failure of ACL. So we have different ways of identifying whether the guide pin is in the right place or not. More often than not, ACL footprint is always present. So we probably try and come in the middle of the footprint. And also the other landmark which we use is the posterior border of the anterior horn of lateral meniscus. So this is one thing. And also we measure about 7 millimeter anterior to the PCL in 90 degrees of flexion. So these are different landmarks which we tend to use so that the tibial tunnel is in the right place. Once we get the guide pin is in, then we sequentially drill it according to the diameter of the graft. So the diameter of the drill is directly dependent on the diameter of the graft. Then the second thing is the femoral tunnel. We try to get it in an isometric position, which is what we talk about. So people have talked about different clock positions. So if you probably look at the femoral condyle in a clock position, so this is, they usually say it's at around between 9 and 10 p.m. or for the right knee, and between 2 and 3 p.m. for the left knee. So, and once we identified the femoral tunnel, and there are different ways of cross-checking this femoral isometric position. We can use intraoperative image intensifier to identify the exact position of the isometric position of the femoral tunnel. There are different templates which we tend to use. There are different grids which people have devised, and there are different radiological landmarks on which we make our femoral tunnel. Then once the femoral tunnel is identified, this is a transtibial technique which I am showing you, but this is not something which we practice routinely. The idea is basically to identify the femoral footprint or the femoral isometric point, then put the guide wire, and then drill it across, and then sequentially ream it to the size of the graft, which will complete the size of the femoral tunnel. And there are also some offset guides which people tend to use, which will also give us the right position of the femoral tunnel. So once the femoral tunnel is, this is what sequentially we drill it. And then this is another technique which we use, or which is the commonly used technique. We don't use the transtibial technique which I have shown. This is the technique which we use. This is the medial portal technique, or the anatomic ACL reconstruction, where we make an accessory medial portal to get this drill through. Once we have made the tibial tunnel and the femoral tunnel, then we pass the graft. And once the graft is passed, obviously it is passed through the femoral side and the tibial side. Once the graft is passed and we have made sure that the creep in the graft is taken out by regular cycling the graft, then we go for fixation. So once the graft has gone through the tibial tunnel and the femoral tunnel, then we go for graft fixation. And this is another important aspect of ACL reconstruction. Graft tunnel positioning, then graft fixation. So the different ways which people tend to fix the graft. One of them is interference screw. This is an interference screw, which is basically goes across from between the graft and the femoral tunnel. And obviously these are made of different materials. We have bioabsorbable screws, we have metal screws, and both of them have some advantages and disadvantages. So this is what is called as an aperture fixation. Then other way of fixing the graft is what is called as cross-pin fixation, which we don't commonly use. And the most commonly used method of fixation is the endobutton fixation, which we use. So the endobutton is basically a small titanium button which sits on the lateral femoral condyle and the lateral cortex, and gives the stability to the graft. And these are called suspensory fixations. When you use a screw, it is called as an aperture fixation. When you use the button, it is called as a suspensory fixation. So this is what the post-operative X-ray usually looks like, depending upon what implant you have used. And this is a staple, which we don't commonly use. So as I mentioned, that is basically about the surgical technique and tips about ACL reconstruction. And as I mentioned before, rehab is also quite important. And the rehab also protocol depends on what is the graft which we have used, what is the graft fixation we have used, and what are the associated injuries. So here comes obviously a discussion with our physiotherapist to see what to do, what not to do. And the major and the basic dictum is move it or lose it. And that is what as surgeons we would like to do. And that is what we emphasize on with the physiotherapist. And before I conclude, I'll just have a short note on the complications which patients with ACL surgery can have. And ACL surgery by and large is a very successful surgery. And because it's an arthroscopic surgery, there are not many complications patients need to be worried about. And complications occur mainly because you have chosen a wrong patient, or you have operated on the patient at the wrong time, or the patient has an associated pathology which you have not identified at the time of surgery. So those are some reasons why people do not have a successful result with ACL surgery. So if you have probably taken care of all these prerequisites or preoperative considerations, in spite of that, there are some complications which we need to be aware of. Complications can occur at the time of graft harvesting. As I mentioned, there are different types of grafts which we take, of which the hamstrings is the most common one. The hamstrings, when we take, there are usually what are called as vinculae, which usually hold the graft in place. So when we are harvesting the graft, if the vinculae are not taken off before harvesting, the graft can prematurely amputate. So that is one common complication during graft harvesting. Then inappropriate tunnel placement. As I said, if the tunnel is not placed, that is doomed to fail. So if you place the tunnel too anteriorly, or if you place the tunnel too posteriorly also, there are issues with block and extension and other issues. So tunnel placement is important. Neurovascular complications are very rare, but obviously when you are drilling the drill bit and you are going towards the posterior horn of the meniscus and the posterior capsule, you have to be really careful. But with pure ACL injury, this complication is highly unlikely. But yeah, you have to be aware of that. Some people after ACL surgery develop recurrent effusions due to either reaction of the graft or due to associated other conditions, or probably because of any foreign material that has been left inside the joint. Another complication which we all are very dreading as orthopedic surgeon is infection, which is unfortunately very, very rare in ACL surgery. But yeah, obviously ACL surgery can also get infected if aseptic precautions are not followed, or if you take any shortcuts. So infection can happen and it can be treated as well. Some people develop what is called a cyclops lesion, especially happens when the graft is placed very anteriorly. People develop a fibrous structure over the anterior aspect of the graft, and it blocks the extension of the knee, and people tend to develop into a fixed flexion deformity and have difficulty in walking. So that is one known complication with ACL reconstruction. Another thing is arthrofibrosis, which is basically nothing but stiffness of the knee. And this is quite common when people jump into ACL surgery in an acute setting. The ideal time for an ACL surgery is about 4 to 6 weeks after the knee has settled down and the swelling has settled down, the pain has settled down, and the patient has a good range of movement. But some people tend to get operated immediately after an ACL injury where the knee is still inflamed. And in these situations, obviously, arthrofibrosis is a common complication. And also, as I said, the role of physiotherapy is quite important. And inadequate physiotherapy or inefficient physiotherapy is also one of the probably common reasons why people tend to have arthrofibrosis. So with this, I end my talk on ACL, and probably it's very right to hand over to Rajesh to talk about rehabilitation with ACL. I mean, as surgeon, I feel, doing ACL probably is one part done, but the most important part follows is the rehab. And Rajesh, if you can probably start your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone. Thank you very much, sir, for a very lucid presentation of the topic, and also for making me part of this initial webinar series. My topic is role of physiotherapy in ACL injuries. ACL is the most researched subject in orthopedics or physiotherapy. So there's a lot of research, only rivaled by only shoulder in terms of research. And it is very difficult to keep up with the latest trends in ACL research, and sometimes the latest research may contradict the well-held beliefs also. So in this context, we'll start about the ACL injuries. A ligament is, as Sir has explained, a tough fibrous tissue that connects two bones at a joint, and an injury is a physical trauma that causes damage to the body caused by an external force. And a sports injury in such is a musculoskeletal complaint during a competition or during training. Since I have mentioned about the sports injuries, why there is a lot of research in ACL injuries? Because a lot of people, lot of sports superstars met with ACL injuries, and we can see from different sports and different parts of the world. Pullela Gopichand, then Yuvraj Singh, then we have Cheteshwar Pujara, and then another football player by name Sandesh. So the different people had different types of ACL reconstructions, and the odd man out here is Mr. Yuvraj Singh. All the other had undergone ACL reconstruction, whereas Yuvraj Singh has managed it conservatively. So in this context, we can see that ACL injuries can be classified in a manner, as Sir has explained, that is the law of three, one third law. That is the same law I am explaining in a different manner. So some of the people are coppers after initial isolated ACL injury. They may be able to do all the activities like a pre-injury status, and they may not have another episode of instability till 1 year. They are considered as coppers. So in spite of having a frank ACL tear, they may not be able to require surgery. Then there are non-coppers, and they are obviously candidates for surgery, and they go for surgery. And there are other 1/3 people who are in between. They may not be able to cope up fully, but they will not be willing to go for surgery for various reasons, and they will try to adjust or modify their lifestyle and go about their life. So what is the criteria for whether a candidate should go for a non-operative treatment or a surgery? So as Sir has already explained, the people who are older than 40 years, or they have minimal exposure to high-risk activities, or they are willing to modify their lifestyle to reduce high-risk activities, or people who are unsuitable, like they are having arthritis, or they are unwilling to comply with the post-op rehabilitation. All these people will be going for non-operative treatment, whereas all other people who are having multiple ligament injuries as well as active lifestyle, especially a sports person, will most probably and will surely go for a surgical treatment. So now there is no how to go about management of a ACL tear, either non-operatively or post-operatively. So there is no single standard protocol. Every department or every hospital has a slightly different protocol, and in fact, every surgeon or the physiotherapy team in contact with the surgical team will have a unique protocol. The reason is the principles may be same, but how they are implemented based on various factors that are mentioned here, the protocol is not a single standard protocol. It depends on the graft choice, timing of the surgery, the surgical technique, how the pain is managed, and especially the patient comorbidities. If they are having other problems also, especially in the other knee or other joints, or they have cardiopulmonary problems, they may not be able to cope with the rehabilitation. Then patient personality type also. If the patient is a very anxious person or he is a demotivated person, then the protocol has to be varied. And even very important distinction has to be made is a patient coming for a rehabilitation, either he is a regular patient or a sports person. The psychology is totally different. The regular person will be more interested in getting the reconstructed ligament healing properly, and there should not be any problem in further life. Whereas the sports person psychology is, I want to go back to my sporting activity as fast as possible, do whatever is possible, and he is willing to do a faster rehab. But we have to take care, both of them. We have to motivate the person who is demotivated, and we have to tame the person who is over enthusiastic. And then especially each surgeon will have a philosophy which will determine what type of protocol is followed. So the protocol depends on all these factors, and the physiotherapy team will coordinate promptly with the surgeon and his team and will formulate the rehabilitation protocol. So how is the ACL rehabilitation protocol progress? There are 2-3 types of progressing. One is time-based progression. Time-based progression is followed initially, that is based on the ACL graft healing time. So ACL graft initially will go for necrosis, then revascularization, and then it will go into maturation, remodeling, and other things. Based on the time-based progression was mentioned. That is, in this first 3 weeks, we have to do this. Next 6 weeks, we have to do. Next 3 months, we have to do this. But the other method is criterion or milestone or goal-based protocol, because we are not treating the graft as such. We are treating the person. So graft we are able to see, but the person may be, each person is unique and he may have other problems or he may have other motivations. So we have to take into consideration how much of the rehab the person is able to achieve. Based on whatever he has achieved, we will progress it. And the third better method is blending of both. Because sometimes enthusiastic sports person may be able to achieve their goals faster, but we have to take care such a way that they are not harming their tissue. That is why blending of both criterion based as well as consideration of the healing of the graft. Then what is the role of physiotherapy in the management of ACL injuries? There are three things to discuss. One is the conservative physiotherapy management. If the person is not going for surgery, how to manage the person. And the second one is if the person is going for surgery, what is the post-operative physiotherapy protocol. And the third one is preventive role. Once the patient either have rehabilitated conservatively or after reconstruction, we have to take care such that the reconstructed graft will not again go for any rupture, or the contralateral graft ligament will not go for rupture. So preventive role is also very important. Then preoperative and postoperative physiotherapy assessment with clinical reasoning and prompt communication and coordination with the surgeon and his team ensures very individually tailored physiotherapy treatment for each patient, either in the inpatient or OP basis or home-based physiotherapy. So some key aspects before going into the rehabilitation protocol, we will discuss about some of the important things. One is weight bearing. So after the ACL reconstruction, mostly as we are in our setup, we are doing mostly a hamstring tendon graft, and other grafts have explained. So weight bearing, all these things are, there is a lot of research, but ultimately all the decision, the literature says that is taken on empirical basis, because various factors are, as we have discussed previously, going to affect the outcome. So commonly weight bearing can be an immediate full weight bearing, or weight bearing as tolerated initially and go to full weight bearing by 2 weeks. And if more structures are involved, if meniscus is involved or it is repaired or PCL is involved, then still weight bearing is delayed. Then next one is assistive device. Either for ambulation, we give either walker or crutches. And these are weaned around 4 weeks generally. Then bracing. Bracing generally gives security to the patient and feeling, and it helps him weight bear immediately after surgery. And even the unlikely event of his falling, it will protect the structure. And it also gives some protection during ambulation for the structure. In spite of all this, there's some research contradicts this and says that in spite of not having a brace also, people are able to rehabilitate to the level in which people are using a brace. So generally in our setup, we use a hinged knee brace, which gives support to the knee joint, either a normal hinged knee or with a lock. It's called as ROM knee brace. Then it is generally weaned around 6 weeks. All the decisions are generally on empirical basis. It depends on surgeon's philosophy as well as the type of graft and all the factors which we have discussed before. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages of the commonly used grafts. So for a patellar tendon graft, it is having high strength, and its fixation is faster, biological fixation, because it heals faster. It's a bone-to-bone healing. So a little bit accelerated protocol we can follow for this. But whereas it has its own disadvantages like anterior knee pain, and there are chances of extensor mechanism or patellar tendon damage. And then long-term quadriceps muscle weakness is also possible in this. If you see the hamstring tendon graft, so as Sarah also has told, it is easy. Donor site morbidity is very less. Then it will not disturb the epiphyseal plate in skeletally immature patients. And loss of muscle strength, knee muscle strength is also recuperated within few years, and it is not going to affect them functionally. Whereas its healing or biological fixation takes longer time. Whereas the patellar tendon graft heals by 6 weeks, this takes around 12 weeks. Then some very important common exercise precautions of ACL reconstruction are, so resistance training, we have to go gradually with hamstring tendon graft, whereas we can go a little bit faster with a patellar tendon graft. Closed chain exercises are mostly encouraged in the initial phase of the ACL rehabilitation. But in the closed chain exercise also, we should not go beyond 60 degrees. And the second important thing is when you are doing closed chain activities, the knee should not go beyond the toes. If it goes beyond the toes, it will have a shearing effect on the graft. Then open chain training, it is initiated later because it has a shearing effect on the ACL graft. And initially only it is started at a later stage of 8 to 12 weeks afterwards. And initially it is done only from 90 to 60 or 90 to 30 degrees. And the terminal knee extension is added at the last. That is from 45 or 30 degrees to terminal knee extension in open kinematic chain is added at the last, because this movement is having the maximum amount of strain on the ACL graft. So physiotherapy management, generally we can divide it into preoperative management or prehabilitation and postoperative management. In postoperative management, the most important aspects which we deal is control of swelling and pain, regaining passive knee extension, then regaining normal range of motion, and then closed kinematic chain exercises, neuromuscular training, cardiovascular conditioning. All these are the 12 or 13 aspects are there which we have to concentrate, and each one we will see. So after an ACL injury, prehabilitation will take place whether the candidate is going for a non-operative management or is going for a reconstruction. We will go about the training the person, and initially price regime, that is protection using a brace which gives a proprioceptive feedback, then rest, then ice compression and elevation to minimize the swelling, and controlling pain and swelling initially is very, very important. Then restoring normal range of motion, developing optimal strength. So all these things should be done before going for a surgery, or even if he is going to rehabilitate in a conservative manner. Especially if the patient is going for surgery, patient education and mental preparation is also very important, where we tell about the surgery and various phases of rehabilitation, prepare him beforehand itself, immediate post-op exercises or post-op walking aids, how to don and doff a brace correctly. All these things are taught to him beforehand itself. And generally, it is around 2 to 4 weeks, or as Sir has described, about 4 to 6 weeks after an ACL injury, may be most optimal time for doing a surgery. This is commonly held belief. But some of the research also says that timing is one aspect, but whereas if the knee is quiescent, that is without any swelling and inflammation, and full range of motion is there, adequate strength is there, there is no instability is there, then they can go for surgery even at a shorter notice. Then this is common, this prehabilitation is common whether the patient is going for surgery or non-operative. And non-operative patient will continue his conservative management and emphasize on hamstring strengthening as well as quadricep strengthening. Hamstring is an agonist for ACL graft. So its action is similar to the action of the ACL. And we have to strengthen it, and as well as quadriceps. Then most important thing in the conservative management is perturbation training, which rehabilitates the proprioceptive feedback from the knee is rehabilitated. It is the most important thing. And we will see this also in the post-surgical rehabilitation protocol. So now we will discuss about post-operative management. So these aspects will also apply to the non-operative prehabilitation, plus these aspects, which only thing is there is a graft here and we have to take care of the graft and go about it. Otherwise, the training of proprioception as well as plyometrics, and all these things hold good for both non-operative management as well as post-operative management. And in this, very important thing to mention is two types of patients are. One is the regular patient who goes about his, after the rehabilitation, he goes about his regular work, his job, or a regular lifestyle. Whereas the second group of people which we receive are sports people or athletes, and they have to be rehabilitated to the utmost pre-injury level, because they have to go highest sporting events they have to participate. So there is a slight variation. Regular patients will be rehabilitated to a point, whereas sports person will be rehabilitated at most. The first important thing in the management of post-surgical rehabilitation is controlling inflammation, swelling, and pain. Most important thing. Otherwise, no, there will be a reflex inhibition of cordyceps if the effusion and pain is not controlled. So some of the things are keeping the limb in elevation using ice pack. And suppose if the swelling is very high, we can use what is called as a cryocuff. It's a motorized collar unit, and we can keep it, and it gives continuous cooling to the, it's like a pressure cuff, like a BP cuff, which is there, which will be wrapped around the knee, and it gives continuous cooling. It helps in pain relief as well as decreasing the effusion. Another thing is electrical stimulation. So the swelling has a negative polarity. So we use an electrical muscle stimulator and keep the negative polarity on the area of swelling and the positive dispersing electrode on the back, low back. This will help in reabsorbing the swelling. Another important aspect of this electric muscle stimulation is neuromuscular electrical stimulation, which can be used for enhancing the cordyceps contraction. If the patient is contracting and we use the electrical stimulation, it will enhance and facilitate his cordyceps contraction in the initial stage. These are some of the modalities which can be used in the immediately post-surgical rehabilitation. Then the second important point in the rehabilitation is full passive knee extension should be achieved as early as possible, and facilitation of a normal gait pattern. Full passive knee extension is required because otherwise there can be a chance of excessive scarring in the intercondylar notch and posterior capsular tissues. And normal knee flexion gait is encouraged instead of the, because of pain is there, the patient tends to walk, but walk with less cordyceps action and in a locked knee position, and naturally there is a 20 degrees of flexion in initial loading. After the heel contact during the gait initial loading, there is a 20 degrees of knee flexion. These people with pain and after surgery, they tend to not go for that because of the reflex inhibition of the cordyceps. They will not be able to do that. This should not be encouraged. We should encourage the normal gait pattern from the beginning. Then the next is range of motion exercises. We have to regain the normal range of knee motion. Initially, we will go for passive movements. There is no restriction for passively mobilizing the knee. It will not strain the graft, either passively by the therapist or self-assisted by the patient. 0 to 90 degrees in first week, 120 degrees by third or fourth week, and up to maximum possible knee flexion by 6th week. Along with the tibiofemoral joint, we also have to mobilize the patella. Patella, we can give superior glide, inferior glide, and medial and lateral glides to improve extension and flexion. Then we can also use a stationary bicycle without much resistance for improving the range of motion in the initial phases. Some of the exercises for regaining range of motion are shown here. These are heel slides, dragging the heel, and along with that, using his own arm. A patient can use his own arms and reinforce the heel slides. Next is supine wall slides, using gravity and the other leg to do knee flexion. And then we also can use a mobile stool. Patient will be able to sit, and instead of moving the knee, he can move the stool forward. It will help in increasing the knee flexion. Then after doing range of motion exercise, the most important aspect in ACL rehabilitation is closed kinetic chain exercises. In closed kinetic chain exercises, the terminal part of the limb is attached to the floor. It is not free. Whereas in open kinematic chain exercises, the terminal part is free to move. The closed kinematic chain exercise advantage is that there will be a co-contraction of the muscles. When you are using the knee joint in a closed kinetic chain, there will be contraction of both the quadriceps as well as the hamstring. Therefore, the strain that is likely to be caused by quadriceps contraction is negated by the hamstring contraction. That is why in the initial phase of ACL rehabilitation, closed kinetic chain exercises are preferred. So closed kinetic chain exercise can be used for activating the quadriceps as well as endurance training by doing co-contractions, and they also can be used for muscle strengthening. Initial range we can start for mini squats from 0 to 45 degrees, toe rises, wall sitting, lunges, and lateral step-ups. All these are progressively done closed kinematic chain exercises that help in both activation of the muscles, improving the endurance of the muscles, as well as strengthening of the muscles. Some of the exercises like wall sitting, lateral step-ups are closed kinematic chain exercises to improve the strength. Then return to functional activities are also very important, because people may not be able to stay at home for longer. They may be wanting to go back to their work, a regular patient. They may want to drive. So for them, guidance is given when they can go back to their work by making their assessment. The people are having sedentary lifestyle, sedentary job or desk job. They can go back to their work in 2 to 4 weeks. Whereas if they are having a job which requires high demand, then they should postpone it 6 to 12 weeks. If we want to single out one single important aspect of ACL rehabilitation, which will determine the success of the rehabilitation, it is called neuromuscular training. Because innate ACL will have proprioceptors on the ligament, which will tell about the position of the knee to the brain. When the ligament is reconstructed, the reconstructed part will not be able to give that much proprioception. So there will be we have to train the rest of the knee to develop this proprioception, and this is the single most important thing. Apart from more than the strength of the quadriceps or hamstrings, the single most important determinant of the success of rehabilitation is the neuromuscular training. The other names are proprioception, balance, or perturbation training. So simple balance activities can start immediately post-op, like weight shift in standing, forward and backward and sideways. Then it can progress to single leg standing, tandem walking, cup walking. And the progression in the later stages is from stable surfaces like floor. They can go on to unstable surfaces. They can stand on a Bosu ball or wobble board and try to maintain a single leg stance. And later we can progress it still by adding activities, standing on an unstable surface and having activities for the upper limb. Then the concentration of the patient will go from his knee to the activity. So that is the time where they get the maximum benefit, and that is the time where they gain the confidence that they will be able to go back to their sport. Then slight variation, apart from proprioception, there is something called as perturbation training. Perturbation training is nothing but we disturb the equilibrium of the person. If the person is standing already on an unstable surface, then we push him and make him unstable still more. Then the righting reflexes will come into picture, and the dynamic knee stability will come. That is why perturbation training is very, very important in ACL rehabilitation. So some of the exercises of proprioception I am showing here: single leg on stable surface, that is floor, on unstable surface. Then cup walking. Then what we have discussed, that a patient is standing on a single leg, already unstable, and then they are doing an upper limb activity. Next is unstable surface for perturbation training. Patient is standing on a Bosu ball, which is unstable. Now the therapist is pushing them to make them imbalance. Then the dynamic knee stability, the equilibrium reflexes will come into picture. So while going about these exercises, we should not be oblivious to the cardiovascular conditioning that is required, because the patient has undergone surgery and he is now in the bed for some time. He is not moving out. So cardiovascular deconditioning will happen. So that is why we have to take care simultaneously that we are going to condition. But we should not put stress on the lower limb or the knee joint for this. So that is why initially it is better to go for a upper limb ergometer, which is shown in photograph here. That will help in maintaining the cardiovascular conditioning, and it can be progressed to stationary bicycle at a later stage. And if hydrotherapy pool is available, water walking and water aerobics also is a good source without straining the knee much. And every day doing about 20 to 30 minutes of cardiovascular activity will keep them conditioned. Then very important aspect is core stability training. The athlete or the sports person, because these are all up to neuromuscular training, maybe the recreational athlete or the regular patient also may require. going forward from here, it is more important for the sports person to develop all these things. Core stability is important because our spine is unstable. It is not a fixed rod. So when the extremity has to work, it is a volleyball or javelin throw, or the lower limb has to kick the football, first the stability of the core should be there. If the spine is stabilized only, the extremity can generate a lot of force. That is why transverse abdominis muscle, multifidus, and the pelvic floor muscles have to first stabilize the spine to generate maximum force in the extremities. That is why core stability is important for athletes. Then another most important thing for athletes is agility training. This is something in a layman term, it's running activities. Agility is defined as ability to maintain speed while changing directions. So that is why even a person who is more agile, in cricket also we can see a person who is more agile will be able to catch the ball even if it is going in a different direction. Without losing speed, he will be able to follow the ball. If the agility is not there, he will lose speed when he is turning. So for sports people, especially footballers and all the people, require the ability to maintain speed while changing the direction. So these are trained by agility training. So initially with a small distance of 20 meters, slow speed we have to start. Then lateral running, side to side running or crossover running, then figure of 8 running, and then cutting patterns. So cutting and pivoting, which is a part of some of the sports, should be trained. After agility training, we'll go for plyometric training. These are something similar to jumping activities. So plyometrics means there is strength, maybe strength is one aspect, power is another aspect. Two people can have same strength, but the person who is able to lift more weight faster is having more power. So plyometrics will help us to increase power. So power is required in most of the sports. That is why plyometric training is very important for a sports person. So some of the activities are jumping on a level floor and jumping on the boxes. Some of the examples I am showing here: hopping on floor front and back, sideways, then diagonal hopping, then pivot hopping, jumping from and turning to 90 degrees and landing. And then another important aspect is sport-specific drills. There is a principle called SAID principle, that is specific adaptations to impose demands. So ultimately we have to train for the sport which we are going to participate. So specific muscles have to be trained. So that is taken care during the sport-specific training drills. Then when can we return to sports? Generally it is after around 9 months. We can go back to sports, but based on not on timing, but we are going to have a functional testing. And when the patient is, the sports person is able to have a strength comparable to the contralateral knee, at least 85% to the contralateral knee, and all the other tests are done and it is satisfactory, and with the consent of the surgeon only, the person can go back to his sporting activities. These are some of the tests that can be done, which will assess the quadriceps and hamstring strength, and video analysis of his jumping, hopping, and cutting and drilling, as well as aerobic capacity tests for cardiopulmonary condition and core stability tests. All these tests are done before sending the patient back to sports. Then the last point is, after the patient is rehabilitated and is going back to sports, still there is a chance for rupture of the rehabilitated ACL as well as the contralateral knee. That is why some of the protocols are developed which help to prevent re-injury. So these are called as, these are done as part of warm-up during the regular training, about 20 minutes. There are 3 different protocols. One is called FIFA 11 plus for 20 minutes, which includes running, strength, balance, and plyometrics, which generally 2 sports persons will do together. And this, they have found out that people who are following this have less injuries compared to those who are not doing this. Then there is another program called PEP, that is called Prevent Injury and Enhance Performance Program. And then the last one is Sports Metrics, especially for female athletes. This is developed by Dr. Noyes, Frank Noyes. Before concluding, I want to mention about a recent advance. So there is a lot of research in ACL rehabilitation. A lot of things to discuss, but one recent advance which is making headlines I am going to mention to you, that is blood flow restriction training. So there are many people who are undergoing knee surgery, either for ACL or other surgeries. They are unable to strengthen their quadriceps properly. who require high intensity training, but they cannot do because of various comorbidities or for various other reasons. So then a novel technique has been developed as part of rehabilitation. It is called blood flow restriction training. In that, we will get high intensity training benefits with low load exercise itself. So if you have a patient whose quadriceps is weak, but he is unable to exercise at high loads, we can go for this. In this, there will be a cuff tied near the muscle which we want to train. And the cuff will increase the pressure in the cuff such a way that it will occlude the entire venous capillaries and partially occlude the arterial vessels. And then maintaining that cuff pressure, then low load exercises are done. This will result in increasing the strength as well as cross section, that is hypertrophy of the muscle. What is the reason for this? Some of the mechanisms mentioned are that the occlusion, blood occlusion causes ischemia. Ischemia results in hypoxia. Hypoxia will result in a hypoxic response from the tissue that will result in metabolic stress. Then the compression itself will cause mechanical stress. So both the stresses, both metabolic as well as mechanical, will result in a response from the body, which will result in release of anabolic hormones as well as protein synthesis. That will help in increasing the strength of the muscle as well as hypertrophy. That is, cross-section area also will be increased. So this is the mechanism that is proposed. And these are some of the studies, even as recently as in 2019, and some studies are ongoing clinical trials about the use of this exercise with blood flow restriction to improve quadriceps function long after ACL reconstruction. With this, I conclude this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rajesh. That was a good elaborative lecture covering the basic aspects of physiotherapy. And as I always tell to my patients, surgery is only half work done, and physiotherapy should be equally good to get a satisfactory result. Sure. And as a team, I think both of us as surgeons and physiotherapists have equal responsibility to finally get a good functional result for a ACL, or for that matter, for any orthopedic patient. And ACL probably is a gold standard in which we can probably achieve results with good communication and better input from both. As you said, I mean, all ACLs are not, obviously, all ACLs are not the same. And as I said, communication comes into picture in these situations. When, if it's not a pure ACL, if it's a multiligamentous or associated chondral lesion or associated meniscal tear, I think communication is the key, because the ACL rehab slightly changes in those situations, and I think those modifications have to be made to get a reasonably good result. Thank you.
Thank you all for the good overview. Thanks, Dr. Sheshkant and Dr. Rajesh, in charge of physiotherapy. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, good talk actually. Yeah, both were really informative, especially those on physiotherapy techniques, you know, those ones that we are, you know, we send all our patients to physiotherapy, but even we ourselves are not aware of the latest techniques and methods that are being used.
Absolutely.
Good to catch up with those. And hopefully all those listening and viewing from outside, you know, of circuit, probably many of them are watching it on Facebook. Any comments you can put on the comment section, any questions. And as suggested, I think by both the speakers, it is a combined teamwork. That is a key principle in treating ACL injuries. Certainly preoperative assessment and preoperative decision making as to what type of treatment method is necessary and crucial in achieving the success. Certainly any surgical procedure must be followed up with a good physiotherapy protocol for the ultimate success of the patient. I'll have one question to Dr. Sheshkant. With regards to the ACL injuries, as you said, the timing of surgery, I mean, you did mention it, but what is your common observation as to how long do you usually see the patients coming to you? And how do you go about them? Like some patients come back to you and say that, usually what happens is they walk in with an MRI scan in their hand. Yeah. And when you ask them what the symptoms are, they say that they have ACL tear. Yeah. And they sort of read it out from the MRI report. Yeah. So how do you go about those patients?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good practical viewpoint. I think, as you said, I mean, if the patient comes in at the first instance directly to us, managing that patient based on the principles is quite easy. But if she has gone to some other surgeon who has advised surgery, and obviously if we probably have to explain to him why surgery is not needed, it becomes slightly more difficult. So the basic explanation I usually tend to give them is the timing. I mean, as my individual assessment, I assess the patient both clinically and go through his history, go through his pre-injury status, what are his expectations from surgery and all those things. And if I make a decision that the patient is definitely going to benefit from surgery, then I discuss the timing of surgery. And as Rajesh has also pointed out, timing of surgery, I don't think is fixed at 4 to 6 weeks. My criteria for a patient to be operated on ACL is when the swelling has come down reasonably well, when the patient is not in too much of pain, and he has got a reasonably good range of movement up to about 100, 110 degrees of flexion, then the patient is ready for surgery. I mean, you don't need to wait for 6 weeks. Sometimes, as pointed out, people can be operated even earlier also. But it all depends on how good the physiotherapy backup is. I mean, if you are operating on a good corporate setup with a good physiotherapy background, which we have, I think timing, you don't need to wait all the way for 4 to 6 weeks. If you feel that the knee is reasonably quiescent and settled down, you can operate even earlier as well. So that probably, I think, will be the key. So good physiotherapy backup, where the patient is being followed up and where you are in contact with a physiotherapist on a regular basis, where the physiotherapist is willing to take your feedback and make changes. I think timing of surgery is not crucial, but as we discussed and as you pointed out, choosing the patient for surgery is probably the key. I think that is what determines the success of any operation, and ACL, I think, is no exception for that.
Dr. Shashikant. And my next are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. I mean, again, the thing is, a lot of patients do not have a clear understanding of weight bearing as to what constitutes a toe touch weight bearing to partial to full. And also, many patients do not really, I mean, especially in corporate setups, what happens is the patients are not from nearby places. We in a district setup and a town setup, it's different because the patients are from nearby places. But for us, patients usually travel from far away places within the city or from districts or even from outside the state sometimes. So how do you devise methods to, in this day and age of whatever online, I mean, even this webinar is happening online. So are there any ways of how we can guide the patients better, because as surgeons, we want a uniform protocol to be given to the patients post-operatively, but it is physically impossible for, maybe I would say 90% of ACLs will not be able to come back to the hospital for rehab. But how do we transfer that expertise to those patients? Yeah, any thoughts? And, how do you, is there a way of remotely engaging them into the physiotherapy process?
Sure, sir. So this is a very important aspect, sir, because many of the patients who come for surgery may not be from the city and they are from faraway places, even in small remote areas. So people again only come back to even physiotherapy also when they come for review. So meanwhile, they may not be able to follow properly, then they will be lagging in their rehabilitation protocol. So for this, what we are doing is there are 3 methods which we can go about, sir. One is obviously in this age when everybody is connected, tele-rehabilitation is one thing where we have video calling to the patient and following it up on a weekly basis, where we show the exercises here as well as when they go back, we'll ask them to demonstrate the exercises in a video call. and then any modifications we will tell. That is one aspect of rehabilitation. Second one is, in spite of having telerehabilitation, they will like to have contact with the therapist in their own place. So there are two ways of going about it, sir. One is we can train the people where we are getting the patients. We can have a webinars like this or talks with the therapists who are staying in places where we are getting the cases, and we can try to get our protocol imbibed into them, so that when our cases reach them, they are able to manage almost like what we follow here. That is one where we can have interaction, physical interaction. We will invite those therapists and talk to them and maybe discuss about them, how to go about it, and in a timely manner, a few times, to take care of our cases. These are second methods. And the third one is where this is also not possible. Then we have to keep in touch with the therapists nearby to them who are going and treating them. We have to have a talk with them along with the patient and guide them about the protocols here. And whatever feedback they give, we have to again share it with the surgeon as well as his team. And there should be a communication channel, because if they are going back and they are not in communication with us and they are having physiotherapy elsewhere, then the channel is cut. So that is why we try to interact with the patient as well as the therapist, anybody who is treating there. We will try to train them, make it part of our extended team. Otherwise, also we will be in touch with them, and we will take the feedback from them and again convey that to the surgeon, and any modifications again when they come for review or during telerehabilitation, we will try to do this. So it's a process which has so many links to be taken care, so many kinks to be softened, but we have to go about it, and this I think so will give better results. We are trying to follow this to an extent.
Yeah, that would be really good for many patients. That's good. Good to know that you're already thinking in those lines.
Sure.
I think it is doable, as
Yes.
I said, in one or other ways, and that would help the patients immensely. Thank you very much. And I thank Dr. Shashikant and Dr. Rajesh for their excellent lectures on this common but very, as mentioned, very much researched and intense topic. So congratulations to both. And if there are any more questions from any of the attendees anywhere?
No, sir. It's all clear.
Okay then. Thank you so much for.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you once
Thank you
again.
very much, sir. Thank you, Shashikant sir, Vedaprakash sir, and Praveen Reddy sir, for being a good team and guiding us through in every part of rehabilitation, and also giving an opportunity for me to be part of this initial webinar series. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Good evening.
Bye.